Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ben Kaiser with Applied Flow Technology, and I would like to thank you for listening into the webinar. Right now, I am recording this webinar on Monday, March 4th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific Standard Time, which is not the live time of the original scheduled webinar, which was Wednesday, May 6th. And the reason why is because I am presenting to you on location from California of the United States. And because I had a business trip that got scheduled during the week of the webinar, I decided to do the webinar a couple days early, and this is the recording that I am making right now, which will be available to you all. And so I want to thank you for listening in, and sorry that you aren't able to listen in live, but you'll be able to see some really good content here today. So where am I? Well, I started off by flying into San Francisco, California on Saturday, and I flew to the city here and was staying up near the northern shore of San Francisco, right in here. Did some sightseeing around the area, went to the mountain area here and drove along the beach, and that's where I started my trip this week. And then I have some visits that I am doing over in the Walnut Creek and Concord areas, which is right in this part of California. And then near the end of the week, I will be finishing up in Sacramento and the Folsom area. So that is where I will be this week on my travels. And so if you've never been to San Francisco before, this is my first time. And so the Golden Gate Bridge is definitely something that you have to make sure that you see. And I was fortunate enough to be able to see it yesterday and also on Saturday, and got a really nice picture. And so this is a picture that I took, and quite a beautiful view. So if you're ever in San Francisco, then I would highly recommend traveling to this area. If you drive up the highway on the western coast, following around here on this road, I took that picture of the Golden Gate Bridge right along this road right here. So this area has some spectacular views of the ocean and the Golden Gate Bridge. So if you're ever in San Francisco, make sure you head over to that stretch, and that's where you'll be able to get a picture that looks just like this for yourself. So this is one of the things I've been able to see this week. Okay, enough about my trip and my travels. Let's get down to business. So today I'm going to be talking about databases and customizing our software. And I'll be demonstrating that with AFT Fathom, but the same capabilities exist with AFT Arrow and AFT Impulse. And if you're not familiar with what our software tools can do for you, you can go to our website, aft.com, and then on our software overview page, this is where you can find information about each of our individual tools, and they are all incredibly user-friendly. When you learn one of them, you know how to use the other ones. So if you know Fathom, you know about 90% of how to use Arrow. Only difference is the compressible flow aspect of things, followed by, if you know Fathom, you know about 80% of how to use AFT Impulse. The difference there is how to define the transients and how to conduct a water hammer analysis. And so there's a lot of crossover knowledge that you can take advantage of when you learn one product. And then you can also import any AFT model across any AFT software. So if you have a model that you built in Fathom, then you need to do a water hammer analysis. You can easily import that right into Impulse and do your water hammer study. There's a few other products that are incredibly useful and they are AFT Mercury and AFT Titan. These are used to help automatically size pipes in your system in order to minimize things like piping weight, life cycle cost, first cost, with the primary goals of being able to stay within your design requirements. So very useful capabilities. Right now, we are in the process of converting Mercury Titan into a new add-on module for AFT Fathom and AFT Arrow. That capability is going to be available to you here very soon in the next couple of months. And once the new automated network sizing modules are available, Mercury and Titan will go away because all that capability will be included right into Fathom and Arrow that you're already familiar with. In addition to that, we are currently doing a promotion right now where if you have Fathom and you need to do a water hammer analysis, you can save 10% off your purchase of AFT Impulse, and this is valid until March 31st, 2019. And so if you need to do a water hammer study, be sure to check out this page, and that can help you save a little bit of money on your AFT Impulse license. All right, so the reason why I'm doing this webinar is because, databases and learning how to customize the software is incredibly useful for your flow analysis. It'll help you be very efficient with the software and will dramatically improve your flow modeling capabilities. But the other reason why is because if you were to look at the upcoming webinars that we have scheduled, today's webinar on database management does an excellent job at setting us up for the next few webinars that we will be doing, including a webinar on cost calculations. And then finally, automated pipe sizing calculations with the new automated network sizing module. And so this capability of knowing how to use databases is key for these next few webinars that we're going to be doing, especially when you get to the point of doing your automated sizing. Now, just so that you all know, for this webinar on database management, I'm basically going to highlight the capabilities. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail. You'll see how to use all the different database tools, but I want to bring you to our tips and tricks articles page. If you go to our tips and tricks page here and click on the magnifying glass, you can do a keyword search for databases. And the reason why this is important is because a while back, I wrote a 4-part blog series on how to use databases. There's first article here, second article on fluid databases, pipe material databases, and then finally the last article in that series is managing databases. So one thing that's incredibly powerful is the ability how you can customize the software however you like, but then you can also share that customization with your coworkers and clients. And so this blog article talks about how to share your databases in those ways. So if you want the details of how to use databases, those 4 blog articles will talk about them. You can also refer to the databases content in our help system. So today I'm going to highlight the primary capabilities, and other things I'll talk about is the user options and how to customize your output format. So this is where you can find those blog articles, and then you can watch the webinar again later to see the live action of what I'll be doing today. So, all right, let me go ahead and jump into the software. Here's AFT Fathom that hopefully you are already all familiar with. And let's talk about the user options. So how do you customize your preferences? What preferences do you get to work with? Well, if you go to the Tools menu, the User Options is where you can find all of the different preferences that you want to customize for the software. So if you open up the User Options, There's several different things that you can do. Right here, as you can see, I have chosen to turn off the startup window and the tip of the day. That's why when I ran the software, it went straight to the workspace. So this is where you can turn off some of the messages that you see, things like that. There's some other visual options. You can change your theme. You can change where your quick access panel is located. Other things that you can change is the number of data points that you see in a table. So by default, if you look at any data table, like if it's a pump curve or a resistance curve, you only would put in 100 data points, up to 100 data points. But if you have more than that you would like to include, this is where you can expand the number of data points simply by adding or subtracting data points in this field here. So if you ever need to put in more data point rows for tables, that's where you can adjust it. The units area is incredibly important because this allows you to customize which type of units that you want to work with, either US units or metric units. There are also some various common units depending on the industry that you might be working in. That way you can filter for those specific types of units and not have to scroll through all the rest of the units that you don't care about. In addition to that, down below here, this is where you can set up your preferred unit. So if there's a common unit that you're always using for a specific parameter, just set that right here as your preferred unit, and that will be the first one that shows up as your default unit. For example, if I always want to see my pressures in terms of PSIG, I can change that here. Now, when I go and run my model and I get results, I will still have absolute pressure units, PSIA, available as all the rest, but it will default to PSIG for me. So that's where you can set up your preferred unit. In addition to your preferred units, there's this area right here where you can show or hide unit items. Why is this available? Well, if you scroll down to parameters like volumetric flow rate, as you can see, there are tons and tons of different units for volumetric flow rate. And let's say that you only use a few of them. Well, you can uncheck all the boxes and then just do the ones that you work with all the time, maybe gallons per minute, gallons per hour, and barrels per day. That way, whenever you look at a volumetric flow quantity in the software, you only will be scrolling through those 3 units. That way you don't have to scroll through the whole entire list every single time. So that'll save you a little bit of scrolling there in the future. Following that, there's the grid that you can work with. You can set up which type of default grid, either the 2-dimensional grid or the isometric grid. You can adjust your grid size and snap objects to the grid. There are some additional workspace options. This is really useful here. For pipes, you have the ability where you can graphically change the pipeline pixelation thickness based upon diameter. That way your larger diameter pipes in the model will be thicker than your smaller diameter pipes. And you can set that up in this fashion by choosing the option to vary the thickness with pipe diameter. So that's the options you have for piping. For junctions, you can do either the classic look like a Fathom 7 or the new way, which is how we have it now in Fathom 10. You can change your icon size to be bigger or smaller. What are some other things that are useful? Colors and fonts. So the colors and fonts is an important area where you need to know how to change your font size, obviously. But something else that you may not be aware of, which is a new feature of Fathom 10, Aero 7, and Impulse 7, is in this area right here, you have the ability to color code your scenario generations. And that's really useful because if you have a model file filled with several different scenarios, and let's say that you have a parent scenario, and then a child, and then you have multiple children here. You might have children of these children, so on and so forth. It can become very, very complicated. So if you set up this color scheme here, you can color code the background of the workspace. That way, whenever you load any of those scenarios, you'll be able to know which generation of scenarios that you are currently loading. So that's what background coloring would do for your different generations of the scenario manager. Hope that you all like my drawings there. All right. Few other things that are helpful under pipes and junctions. By default, Fathom is set up to use the most recently used pipe size and material information. So if you specify steel material with a 3-inch nominal size, the next time you draw a pipe on the workspace, it will use that same material size and type. But you can change what your most recently used was. Instead of using the most recently used data, maybe you want to set up a default material and friction model that you can use. You can also set up default design factors to account for unknowns in your system, default elevations, different things like that. Some other things that are really important is your file locations. So for the file locations, this is where you can set up a default model file folder to save all your models somewhere on your computer. The default database search locations is useful because if multiple people are creating their own custom information, you might want to create a shared folder somewhere on your network where everybody throws in their custom database files. That way, whenever you go to run the software, if you add those file paths here to this location, then Fathom will look to those areas to find database files and will connect them and make them available for you. Followed by that, we also have a folder where you can put your backup files whenever your model is saved. By default, it says in the same folder where your model is saved, but you can specify that to go somewhere else if you want. And then last but not least is backup settings. And so this is definitely something you need to be familiar with. Fathom is going to create up to 3 backup files for you by default. And so whenever you save the model, it's going to create a backup called BAKF001. That's your most recent backup file for Fathom. And so this is where you can specify how many backup files you want to create. If your model ever got corrupted somehow or broken or you lost it, then you can easily recover your backup file by renaming the extension to FTH for Fathom. And then you run the model or run the software and then open that model. That's how you can recover your most recently used backup file. This option is particularly important, is the automatic save option. And so you can turn that on and Fathom will automatically save your model for you periodically. We recommend not doing anything less than every 5 or 10 minutes because if you model something and then you get up and walk away, then it can very easily save unintended changes to your model very, very fast, and you wouldn't be able to recover it. So I would recommend keeping that every 5 or 10 minutes there. Once you set up your preferences in different ways, you can click on this button right here to save as your new user defaults. That way, anytime that you go to run Fathom again, you don't have to go through and set everything up all over and over. simply click on this button right here to load your user defaults, and that way it sets up your parameters how you did them originally. And then lastly, if you want to be able to go back to how the preferences were set up originally, then just click on Reset to AFT Fathom Defaults. That will reset all of the default preferences to where they were originally installed. That way you don't have to uninstall and reinstall the software. So that's all your user preferences in the Tools menu under User Options. All right, let me open up a model really quick here. Two other things that you can customize is your model data window and your output window. And a lot of times people may not use the predefined formatting that you can set up for your output and input formats. So let me open up this file and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so here we have a model of a piping system, and this is the workspace where you can see what your piping system looks like graphically, but the model data window is incredibly useful for displaying all of your parameters in a tabular format. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hide the quick access panel here, and we'll focus on the model data window in a little bit more detail here. So in the model data window, I have three sections, and I'm going to collapse the bottom section and the top section, and we'll focus on the pipes here. So as you can see, the pipe input area is where you can find all of your input information in a tabular format. And as you can see, the default way that we display things contains a lot of information that you may not really care about. You know, it says, is the pipe defined? Yes or no? What's the pipe name? Maybe if we had initial flows on here, it would display that. There may be several parameters that you care about that are not in this table, or you just don't care much about. And so if you open up the model data control with this button right here, then this is where you can customize certain input formats. So I don't care about pipe name or if it's defined. I don't care about my initial flows. I don't care about the connected junctions. I just want to see materials, size, and type. I know that I'm doing all cylindrical piping, so I don't care about geometry. And that way you can simplify the pieces of information that you're displaying. Same thing for my junctions. So once I click OK, you'll see how that dramatically simplifies your model data window. So this is how I want my format of the model data window to look for me every single time that I go to run Fathom. So what I would do is I would set that up, and then in the model data window here, after I configure the preferences like how I want, I would click on Save Control Format. And then you just give it a name. I'll call this Model Data Parameters. And click OK. So the reason why that's useful is because I can go in and open up a completely different model now. And let me go and open up a different model just to drive the point home here. Give me just a sec. Let's open up the housing project. So if I open up the housing project here, this contains all of that additional piping information that I don't care about, like the name or if it's defined or not. And so I don't want to deal with the default way that the model data window is defined. So instead, what you can do is open up the model data control and then click on Load Control Format, browse to that database file that you just made, and then click Open. And there we go. So now it arranges my model data just how I wanted it to. Length, hydraulic diameter, material size, type, etc. So that can save you some time and also will help significantly maintain a level of consistency with you and all of your other AFT users. That way, whenever somebody sends you a model file, you can be assured that you're all going to be looking at the same information, or if you want to bring all this information into a report, you can easily do a print preview. That way, if you want to include this as an appendix item for your reports, then when you set up that model data as a control format, it can ensure that everybody has the same type of structure for their model data input. So that's what we mean when we talk about a control format. A control format is simply when you go in and set up the various parameters that you want to display for your model data. You also have the same flexibility with the output itself. So if I run this model, which I'm going to have to go in and load a different scenario here first. Let's say I load this particular scenario and I run my model and get results here just like this. Well, I see my results here, and these are all the parameters that we will show you by default, but I don't care about a lot of these. So I could go into my output control window. I could turn off the name of the pipe and the as well as the pressure maximum and minimum. I can turn off head loss from gravity. Maybe I want to do volumetric flow rate both in terms of gallons per minute as well as barrels per day. Well, I can add the same parameter twice and do different units. And then I want to change my units all to PSI G. Well, this here is set up because I set my preferred unit to be PSI G in the user options window. But nevertheless, you simply go in here and configure your output control, the whole window, not just the parameters. You can customize anything on these tabs. And then once you're done configuring all of that information, just save it as a control format, output format, and click OK. That way, whenever you go to open up a different Fathom model, which I'll do here, I'll go in and open up another model. Let's do this one. So I'm now in this model file here. So I go back to my output and then I load my control format. I simply browse to that output format file that I made. And there we go. And this is the same exact way that I brought in my control format file like I did with the model data window. So that's how you can customize your reports so that everybody is doing it in the same way. Everybody's showing the same parameters in the same order, the same units, gives you a lot of flexibility and yet a lot of amount of being able to maintain consistency. That's why you want to use the software, because it allows you to have everyone do it the same way. And that's what you would set up your output reports for. Okay. Let me go ahead and talk about databases now. So I'm going to bring in just a blank new Fathom interface here. And so let's talk about databases. If you go to database, this is where you can do all sorts of different types of databases. There's component databases, fluid databases, pipe material databases, et cetera, et cetera. Let's break this down a little bit. I want to show you fluid databases first because it's a little bit easier. So let's say that you don't have a license to the Chempact database, which is right here. Or let's say that you have a fluid where the fluid actually does not exist in Chempact or the NIST RefProp database. or any of the other databases? Well, if you are able to generate your own custom fluid information from something like Aspen or HYSYS, then you can easily bring in that information and create a custom fluid in Fathom, or also in AFT Arrow or AFT Impulse. So the way that you do that is by going to Database and then Fluid Database. So when you open up the Fluid Database, you can go to Add New Fluid, and then all you would need to do is give your fluid a name and then maximum and minimum allowables for the temperatures. After that, the only information that you need is simply density and viscosity as functions of temperature. And then if you want to do heat transfer calculations, you would need specific heat, thermal conductivity, and an enthalpy reference. So once you fill in that information, that's how you'd be able to create your own custom fluid database. So I actually have some of that right here in my custom fluids spreadsheet. So this is where I got my data from. Let's say I got it from some other, handbook, and that handbook has all of my thermophysical property data. What I can do is get everything into this format here, and then if I select everything from Excel and then copy it, I can go back into Fathom and then go to Edit Table and paste. And then it needs an enthalpy reference. Let's say 0 at 0. And we'll give it a fluid name, Ben's Webinar Fluid. Give it a maximum allowable temperature, which could be the boiling point if you want. So right here, I'm going to say 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The minimum temperature is going to be 0, and then generate curve fit. So this is my fluid data. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that whenever we do the calculations in the software, we are not going to be using any of your data. Okay? Once you get your data in here, this data is not used anymore. The only thing that we're doing is either a polynomial or an interpolated XY curve fit. So those are what is being used for the calculations, not your original data points. So if you have a significant amount of scatter in your data, your calculations would not necessarily be as correct. So we're fitting them with a curve. So once you go in here and you create your custom fluid database, click OK. And now, once you've created your custom fluid database, it will appear in the AFT standard list. So if I scroll up here to the B's, Ben's Webinar Fluid, I can add that to my model, put in my temperature, and calculate my properties, and there we go. And so it's as easy as that for creating your custom fluid information. And once you click OK, you can use that fluid. Again, if you go to our website and you do the keyword search on our tips and tricks page for databases, and you read the second blog article right here, name that fluid, it'll walk you through exactly that process of how to create your own custom fluid. The first article, Get to Knowing Your Databases, that talks about the database structure in general, and that's really important to know, so make sure that you read through this article, and it'll give you a lot of good background information and detail on databases. All right. So we've talked about the fluid database. Let's talk about the component database next. So for things like valves, we have several handbook loss models that are built in for you, and they come from Crane, Idlechick, and Miller. And essentially, you would just go in here and select any of these that you're using, and then boom, there's a K factor. Where does that K factor come from? Well, this particular one comes from Miller, from that reference. It is possible to create your own custom components just like it is for fluids. So what you could do is click on User Specified, and maybe you've got a CV loss model, and your fully open CV is 1,000. Another piece of information that you might have on the optional tab would be a open percent versus CV curve. Well, if I click on this Create CV versus Open Percent button right here, it allows me the ability to create a curve from scratch if you don't have any other data. So I'm going to go ahead and do equal percentage. And my fully open CV is going to be 1,000. And then I want my percent increment to increase by 5. And I fill in my data tables. There's my graph. And then I'll transfer this. So right here, I have two pieces of information. I've got my CV value, and I also have open percent versus CV data. Now, here's the advantage where if you fill out this information here, is that you can go in on the loss model tab, and you can use open percentage as your basis. So maybe this is 100% open. Well, what you might want to do is give it a name like valve model XYZ dash 100% open. I can click OK. And so the reason why that's useful is because next I would select that object on the workspace and then go to database, and now I'll click on add component to database. I can keep that same name. Click OK. So when I draw a second valve on the workspace, this could be in the same model or any other Fathom model, is when you drag your valve on there, you can click on this database list and choose that one, and then bam, there's all your data. So I've got my CV versus open percent curve there, and then for my loss model, let's say that this one is 90%. Well, if I want to do 90%, I can turn that off and then give it another name, valve XYZ dash 90% open. So when I put in my second valve there, I can add this to the database. So now if I go to database here, I can look at browse database content. So if I select the database that I'm adding all this information to, which happens to be my Fathom local user database, I'll talk about that in a minute here, click select, you can see which pieces of information are included in this specific database right here. I've got custom fluids and custom components. And so if I go in and I click on fluids, I can show my selection, so I can see that I have one fluid in my local user database. If I do components, I can see that I've got two different valves right here. So now if I want to drag another valve on the workspace, I have, when I go to open that guy up, I have two different valves I can choose from, either 100% or 90%, and boom, once you pick the one that you want to use, it automatically populates whatever information you specified here. Let me show you an option in terms of pumps. So I'm going to go ahead and drag a pump onto the workspace, and in my pump, I'm going to specify a pump curve. So when I open this guy up here, I'll choose pump curve, and I'll click on enter curve data. The default is to use the simple method. The simple method is one pump curve per junction, okay? However, there's a way that you can easily choose from a great multitude of pump curves with a single junction, and that's if you do this multiple configuration method. And so here, I'm going to go ahead and delete this because It's just unspecified. And I'm going to create a new configuration. So I'll call this Ben's pump, and we'll call this we'll call it Ben's pump number number 1. Impeller diameter. This comes from a spreadsheet where I have a whole family of curves, which would be from a 8-inch impeller trim. So I'll put 8 inches in there, and this is actually supposed to be the RPM, so that's 1800. I put the description in the wrong place. So this will be called Ben's pump dash 101. Okay, that's good enough. So I now can go back to my spreadsheet and copy this data and paste it in. So I'll do paste, generate my curve fit, update the configuration, and then I'll go ahead and do one more RPM. I'll do the same RPM, 1800, and then 7 inches, and I'll call this Ben's pump dash 201. And so maybe this is the data that exists for that particular pump configuration. So I'll paste it in, generate my curve fit, and update my configuration. So when I do that, I now have 2 different pump curves that I can choose between using in my model. And I also have the RPM that the pump curve is associated with. So once I go in and I define the information however I want, I click OK. And with that junction selected, just go to database and then add the components of the database. We'll call this Ben's pump for webinar. And now if I want to drag a new pump onto the workspace here, I just go in and on my database list drop-down menu, click on Ben's pump for webinar, and there we go. And that information is already all available for me. Now, I'm not going to go through the process of showing you how you would go through and create the whole family of curves that are in this spreadsheet because that content is in another blog article that I wrote several years ago. So if you go back to our tips and tricks page and you read through all of our different blogs, then you'll be able to find one. I believe it if you do a search for pump configurations, that might allow you to find it. Let's see. Yep. So if you type in a keyword search of pump configurations, this is the blog article that I wrote earlier that shows you how to generate all these families of curves. This is a great job for an intern to do. So if you're trying to figure out what kind of work to keep an intern busy with for the summertime, then this is what they can work on for you, is they can take one of your pump catalogs and they can go through and build in all of these pump curve families and configurations, and then they can add that to the database list, and it will make your pump curves available for all your different models. So be sure to read through that blog article, and it will help you learn how to use those capabilities effectively. All right, so now if I go back and browse my content in my database manager, what you'll see here is if I do my components, I can now see that I have a pump in my database list there. All right, let's talk about fittings in a different sense. I've shown you how you can add components of the database by using actual junctions. There's also the ability to model fittings inside of a pipe as well. So if you open up the pipe property window, all you need to do is specify a diameter. Doesn't matter what it is. Once you put in a diameter, you can go to the fittings and losses tab, and then you can specify any number of fittings and losses inside the pipe. So this is where you can lump in your fittings into a single pipe without having to have a whole bunch of additional short pipe segments. we basically will take the total K factor right here, and we'll average that out along the length of pipe. It allows you to maintain a relatively simple model while still generating highly accurate results. It is also possible to create your own custom fittings for the pipe fittings and losses tab. And once you add in your additional fittings and losses, you'll see this ampersand. That means that you've got additional fittings and losses in that pipe. So the way that you would do it is you would go to database. This is where you keep going. Database is where you can find all that information. And then fittings and losses. So once you go in here, you can create your own custom fittings for the additional fittings and losses window inside of a pipe. So what I would do here is I would click on create new loss item, or create new loss item, and then you go through the process of setting up these details. So you can do your different junction category or your different fitting type, whether it's standard threaded or smooth flanged, etc. You can do a subtype if you want, different geometries. If you do pipe size, you can specify that value. You would have to define the loss model, whether it's based upon a constant K value or if your K factor is a function of the friction factor, like it could be from Crane. And then you'd put in your loss value, and you can simply type in your reference and notes. So after you go through and fill in this information here, which is a pretty quick and easy and trivial process, you would accept that change, and then you'd be able to see your custom fittings inside the fittings losses window. So because that's pretty straightforward and pretty easy, I'm not going to go through the process of showing you how to do that. I'll let you explore that information on your own. But that's how you would add custom fittings for your fittings and losses tab in the pipe property window here. We also have insulation databases that you can work with. And so we've built in several insulation data sets for you. All you would do for creating your own is to click on Add New Insulation. And very similar to fluids, all you would need is maximum and minimum allowable temperatures, a fluid name, and then you specify the thermal conductivity as a function of temperature. My drawings here kind of get a little out of control. And then your density information, and that's all you need. And once you define your custom insulation, you can then model it. How do you model insulation? Well, if you open up this pipe right here, there's the insulation tab, and you can add either internal or external layers of insulation. Pick your database source. So if you specify that in the database, you can choose it from the drop-down menu directly, and then specify the thickness of that insulation. And then we can do the heat transfer calculations to account for your insulation that you have on your pipes. So that is how you can do custom insulation. The last piece is custom pipe materials. So if you were to open up a pipe, the minimum required input that is needed for defining your pipe is your inner diameter. That's all that you need to fully define your pipe, as well as length and friction model. However, you might want to use some common materials. So we have built in several pipe materials for you that you could choose from. You would simply go in here and choose any of these, and then you can do different nominal sizes, different types, etc. So a lot of times people will ask me how you can specify steel material pipe if you have piping that's larger than 48 inches, because if you go down for this material here, we don't have anything larger than 48 inch. Well, you can, and the answer is you would create your own custom pipe material, your own custom pipe material database to do this. So you go to database, and then pipe material database. There's a couple ways to do this. The manual way, once I open up this window here, is to click on New Material. So if you click on New Material, this is where you start to find your information. So I'm going to do a material type. We'll call it gold pipe. It's a pipe for the elite. And we'll give it a nominal size. So we'll call it 10 inches. And then we'll give it a material type, shiny number 1. And you can do different geometries for your custom pipe materials. So if you want to do rectangular duct, you certainly can. So I'll keep it cylindrical, and the inner diameter here will be 9.8 inches. So the wall thickness here would be 0.1 inches. Then we'll give it a friction data set. So we'll call this smooth absolute roughness. And then you can choose any of these different friction models from the drop-down. This is for creating a standard friction set. You can create multiple friction sets as standards, or you can just make one and then change it whenever you want in the pipe property window. So here, our smooth absolute roughness will be 0.002, let's call it, and click OK. And so once my computer finishes thinking here, I now have a new material, a new size, and a new type. Let's do another type. So if I click on the 10 inches, might be another 10-inch pipe, but we'll call this shiny number 2. Give it an inner diameter, we'll call this 9.9 inches. So here the wall thickness would be 0.05. Click OK. And so I now have a new material with a new pipe size and 2 different types that I can use. Now, as I mentioned, you can do as many frictional data sets that you want to make as standard as you want. So what I would do and recommend is add them at the material level. That way they can be available for all sizes and all types. So I'm going to click on gold pipe material, and I'm going to click on new data set. Here, I'm going to do a different friction model. I'm going to call it rough absolute roughness, and I'll give it a value of 0.04. So I've got 2 frictional data sets here. I'll do one more, and I'll call this Hazen-Williams, and we'll give it a Hazen-Williams value of 137. I just picked it out of the air. And so now I have 3 standard frictional sets that I can work with. And then for my pipe thermophysical properties, this is where you would specify your thermal conductivity as functions of temperature. Now, as you can see, modulus of elasticity is available as an optional piece of information. But modulus of elasticity is not even used for steady state with Fathom or Aero. Why would it be there? Well, the answer is if you are ever going to import your Fathom model into Impulse to do a water hammer study, the modulus of elasticity for your pipe is the required piece of information. So the advantage is if you specify your modulus of elasticity now, that's one less thing that you would have to do when you go to do your water hammer analysis. So that's why this option is here, even in Fathom where modulus is not used. And then there's density data. I'm going to ignore all this for right now. You can do it later if you want. But after you go through and you create your different pipe materials and click OK, once you open up your pipe material is now available in the pipe material dropdown. So here's my gold pipe. I have my single size. I have my 2 different types that I have, shiny number 1 and shiny number 2. And then this is where you can do your different standard friction models. So if you click on that drop-down menu If you have multiple items that you built in, then you can easily pick between any of these. Otherwise, you can do user specified and then you can do whatever you want. So that's how you create a pipe material database from scratch, one by one. However, it's a little bit easier if you build out your whole pipe material databases, especially with the fact that you've got different nominal sizes and then different schedules in each nominal size that you're trying to deal with. So if you click on import from file, then this format here tells you how you could set up a spreadsheet with which order of input that you need. That way, if you build your entire pipe material database in Excel, you can easily import it right in. So this makes it much quicker and easier because you can copy and paste information from different rows in your Excel spreadsheet, and this streamlines the whole process. So if you create your pipe material database in Excel, then you can import it here in this fashion, and that builds everything out a lot quicker. Okay, so I'm trying to cancel out of here. There we go. All right, so let's take a look at my database content again. So if I go to database and then database manager, let's not look at database manager. We'll do that in a minute. Let's look at browse database content. So if I click on select database, as you can see, there are tons and tons of databases that you can choose from. If you remember when I opened the first model in this webinar, it was from our hot water system example that we've included. That hot water system example that had 3 pumps and 2 heat exchangers has a database file associated with it. Man, my mouse is really not doing good at drawing right now. These 2 database files were included with that model. So when I went to go into file open, and then I opened up the hot water system example, which if you go to the help menu under show examples and then pick your favorite units, move this over here. The hot water system example is one of our standard examples. It's this one that I'm talking about right here. This model has database files that are associated with it. And because I opened up this model file earlier on in the webinar and I did not close Fathom, because this model has database files that are associated, it added those databases to me to my Fathom model. So if you connect to somebody's database files, it makes them available for you later as well. In addition to that, we also have the default database that comes with Fathom. That's read-only. Whenever you create custom content, custom pipe materials, custom fluid properties, custom installation, custom anything, any of that custom stuff is going to be saved in your local user database. So that local user database contains all of your custom information. And then finally, we have all of the different pipe materials that AFT has provided for you. So if I go down to my local user database, this is all the custom stuff I've built. I've got my fluid, I have my components, and then finally for my pipe materials, I have my gold pipe. So the question is, how do you take this information that you have created on your own computer as custom information and share it with somebody else so that they can use it? Well, here's how you do that, is you go to the database menu and then open up the database manager. The database manager here has different databases that you can connect to and add to your model. I'm not going to talk about that today because that's discussed in the blog article, which is the 4th in the 4-part blog series that I did, but I will talk about this tab right here for editing databases. So how do I take the custom information that I made on my computer and send it to somebody else? It's really easy. There are 2 columns here that are important. There's the source database. That is where your information is coming from. And then there's the changing database. Where is your information going to? So let's talk about the source database side first. So if I want to send this database information to somebody else, I first created it on my computer. Anything that you do custom, fluids, pipe materials, whatever, that's going to be saved in your local user database file. The local user database is talked about in the blogs that I wrote, so be sure to read those, and I'll give you more detail on the different structure of database files. So as you can see here, I've accessed my local user database, and there are different sections. Fluids, and then I have valve components, I have pumps components, and then my pipe materials. And so as you can see, there are multiple line items for each different type of database. The next thing I do is I want to tell that custom information right here where to go. So there are 2 places that you can send that custom information. You can edit an existing database, or you can create a brand new database. So let's say that my colleague has not created their own custom stuff, and I'm going to send this information to them. So they didn't already send me their own database file. I'm going to create a new one. So what I'll do is I'll create a new database, and I'm going to give it a name, database for webinar. Then you'll give it a description, pumps, valves, fluids, and pipes. There we go. So I'm going to transfer everything over. So I'm going to copy it. So I'll select it here and copy it right over. And then I'll do the next section. I'll do my 2 valves, copied over. Components, click the box, copied over, and then pipe materials. Select them and copy them over. So now if I close this window here and I collapse everything, here is my database file that I just created, database for webinar. So let's go ahead and open this up. I'm going to open this with Notepad. There's not much that you can really do with it, but the important thing I want to show here is that we've got information. So I just took the information that was located in my local user database on my computer, and I transferred it to a brand new database file. And once I go to send the database information, the file that I'm going to send the other user is this database file right here. I want to make a very clear distinction. Whenever you create custom information, it's in your local user database. What is that database called? Well, if you were to go into your database manager and you access that local user database, this tells you what the name of the database is and where to find it. So this tells you the file path where you can get that information. It's called fth_user10.dat. That's the 2010 local user database file. So if I browsed on my computer to that location, so I go to my C drive, you have to make sure you can access hidden folders on your computer under users, my name, app data, roaming, applied flow technology, Fathom, and 10. There we go. So buried deep within this file path, this file right here is my local user database file. So whenever you create custom pieces of information on your computer and somebody asks you for that, you do not send them this file. Don't do it. That's not the file that you send. what you need to do is you need to transfer the information from that file to another one, either a brand new one or they might have created their own custom file that they send to you. So that's what you would send them, not your local user database file. You never send anybody this file. This is your file for your computer. Do not send it to anybody else. So let's pretend that I'm on the receiving end now. Okay, so I'm going to go into my local user database on the edit side, and I'm going to delete that information from my local user database, and I will show you what you would do if you receive that file. Let's see, I forgot to check the box. There we go. So this has all this stuff here. There we go. Okay, so if I open up this pipe here, I can see that I do not have my gold pipe in here anymore. So all that information is in my external database file. So if I go to database and then database manager, I can look at my local user database and review the content. There's nothing there. So if I was to browse the content in my local user database, nothing there. Okay, it's empty. So I'm going to go backwards this time. I'm going to take the information from that external text file that I just created, and I'm going to throw this into my local user database because I'm simulating the colleague that's on the receiving end of this file. So I'll go to database and then database manager and then edit database. So the source now is going to be an external file. So here we would click on other. And that's going to be this database for webinar. This is the one that I recently created. I'll click open. Now, let's say that, so instead of creating a new database, I can select a database to edit. So I can transfer this information to any of these database files if I wanted to. But what I want to do is I want to transfer this information to my local user database. So the other user of the software made this information, and I'm going to put it in my local user database so it's in my computer for all model files. So now I just go in and I start transferring all of this information right back in. I copy it right back over from my pumps list and then my pipe materials. And there we go. So now if I go back into my pipe here, I can go back in and gold pipe, and there it is. So I just took the information that I had in the external database file that I created, and I pushed this information right back into Fathom into my local user database. So that's all that there is to it, is you create your custom information in Fathom, and then in the database manager, this is where you take your information from. It'll be in your local user database. When you make it custom on your computer for the first time, you transfer it to a database file. You can either send it to an existing database file that maybe somebody else made, or you can create a brand new database file. It's just a matter of transferring information back and forth, and that's really all there is to it. So if you read through those 4 blogs on databases, it'll make you an expert, and you'll find that databases are actually really, really easy and simple to use, and they will dramatically improve your efficiency with your flow modeling, as well as your ability to customize the software however you like. And it's really, really important to understand how to use databases, because the next upcoming webinars that we will be doing have to do with databases. So when you look at the next webinars right here, the one that we have coming up in a couple of weeks on March 13th, I'm going to show you how to do cost calculations. So when you do cost calculations, you have cost databases. Cost databases have to be associated with regular engineering databases, which is what I've created here. I showed you the engineering database side of things, and then in 2 weeks, I'll show you the cost database side of things, and that's how you'll be able to use Fathom to do a full cost calculation of your entire system. You can determine what your piping, your fittings, your components all cost for material, maintenance, installation, and energy. And then after that, not only is it important as an engineer to know what your costs are, it's important to try and minimize those costs and reduce them. So the next couple of webinars that we'll be doing are going to introduce the capabilities of the new add-on modules for Fathom and Arrow that we have coming down the line here. The automated network sizing module. There's one for Fathom, one for Arrow, and this is going to show you how you can use Fathom and Arrow to automatically size your piping in order to automatically meet your design requirements. It will save you tons of effort and time and money, and it's going to be really important to know how to use databases and cost databases for that new module. So stay tuned for those webinars. Read the blogs and let us know if you have any other questions, and we'll be glad to help. So thank you all very much for your time today and for listening in. And until next time, have fun with the software and enjoy the rest of your week.